You are listening to last month's Patreon Party People podcast, which goes up for free on a 1-month delay. If you would like to listen to the most recent podcast the moment it goes live, simply visit patreon.com/blazehedgehog and pledge $1 a month or more. You can now also make a one-time donation, and anyone who makes a one-time donation will instantly unlock the current month's podcast for everyone. All you have to do is visit patreon.com/blazehedgehog, and don't forget, Blaze Hedgehog is written like one word. Once again, that's patreon.com/blazehedgehog. Hello and welcome to the June 8th edition of the Patreon Party People podcast. I am, of course, your host, Ryan Bloom. And I think it's probably going to be kind of a short podcast this month. I mean, relatively short. I think we're going to get back down to the around, we'll say, an hour range, maybe 45 minutes. I don't actually know this. I'm just kind of making an assumption. But the reason why is I don't really have a lot to talk about this month. Did a lot of talking last month, had a special guest on the podcast. If you've missed it, a longtime friend of mine and fellow Patreon supporter, Setsune Weifel. He was on last month. Weifel? Oh no. I think he told me it was okay to say Weifel long time ago. For some reason, I had this momentary worry of like, uh-oh, am I saying this right? But no, I think I am. I mean, I say this at the end of videos like all the time. So, well, not all the time. Gosh, we're already off on a tangent, folks. Maybe this will be a long podcast. I'm not entirely sure. But like I was trying to say before I got so thoroughly distracted by my own neuroses, or whatever you want to call it. Last month, long podcast. You should go listen to it if you haven't. Big, long discussion, like 2.5 hours on Sonic Forces. And then this month, it's been about 2 weeks. Well, no, it's probably been about 3 weeks since the last podcast. And I've really just been keeping my head down, cranking on this Sonic Mania video review. As far as games played, things I've done, there's nothing really. It's been pedal to the metal, balls to the wall, Sonic Mania video review. Doing artwork for it, refining the script more and more. Maybe you saw a tweet where I put it through this thing called Hemingway app, which is like a proofreading algorithm sort of thing that tells you, are you using too many adverbs? Can you shorten this sentence? Are your paragraphs too long? Things like that. And using that, I cleaned up the script a little bit. It's obviously not quite up to the standard that the Hemingway app wanted it to be, but it's up to a standard I'm comfortable with. I found out I tend to use a lot of adverbs. I think Hemingway app was probably a little, harsh on things, because, gosh, what is it? It said it was almost 6,000 words long, and it only wanted me to use 6 adverbs in the entire piece. And that's not a lot. I use a lot of adverbs. I think the first time I pasted it into Hemingway app, the script said it had 118 adverbs out of a maximum of it wanted 6. So I think over the course of, going through, looking at its feedback, paring things down, rewriting things, stuff like that, I think I got it down to 82 adverbs. So, still a lot, still, a ton of adverbs, but, 20 less. So that's actually pretty good, I think. And, it's being an algorithm, not a human being. It is obviously a little more picky than usual at what it considers an adverb to be and what it considers, one of the errors it would give me was like a friend of mine, when he would proofread my stuff a long time ago, he'd tell me, commit to what you're saying. Don't waffle. Don't be like, oh, I think, or apparently, or one assumes. You want to take a hardline stance on an opinion. And Hemingway app would obviously, look for what it thought was that, and it would point it out. And sometimes it would be like the word just. It did not like me using the word just, and I use the word just a lot in things that I write. So, it's a back and forth, cleaning things up, getting things a little more ready, clarifying ideas, paring down adverbs, getting rid of repetitive wording, things like that. Been doing a lot of artwork, been doing a lot of sketches. My hand is actually starting to hurt. And in a way that's like almost a little bit like troubling. Like, I've had carpal tunnel problems in the past. But what was it? Last night I did 3 or 4 sketches, and by the end of that 4th sketch, like, I was not only getting like a really bad cramp in my wrist, but this morning I woke up and some of my fingers were tingling, which is, carpal tunnel, you kind of get used to that. That happens sometimes, especially if you don't stretch properly, which I never stretch properly. And like, that's kind of a dangerous thing, right? You're supposed to, as someone who uses the computer a lot, I'm supposed to be taking better care of my wrists. And for the most part, we'll say like 80% of the time, it doesn't actually bother me. But I think, art-wise, got to be careful because, holding a pencil, that's a lot of wrist movement. I'd probably do well to have like an actual artist's easel, but 1, I don't have room for that in this apartment, and 2, I don't actually draw that much. That's kind of why, like, I started doing art for video reviews, is because it would be like the one thing in my life that would genuinely force me to do more artwork, because I know I have at least some talent, and it would do me well to exploit that talent to put like a unique spin on my videos where other people don't. It gives my video reviews something unique to them, as having this artistic element to it. And that's the other thing that I'm actually doing with this video review, is now I'm sort of taking it to the next level. I think maybe I mentioned this last month. I'm not entirely sure. I don't have a scanner anymore. The scanner I had back in Colorado 2 or 3 years ago was an ancient piece of technology. We're talking, I think I've had that, I don't have it anymore. I had that scanner since 1998 to around 2015 or 2016. That's how old that scanner was. And it worked because, I was still on Windows XP this entire time. So now that I've upgraded to Windows 10, I don't have a scanner anymore. So what I've ended up doing with this Sonic Mania video review, I sketch out artwork in pencil, in paper. I use my digital camera to take a picture of the paper, and then I import it into my art program, and I convert that pencil sketch into a piece of pixel art. And that's kind of something I'm going to be trying out for this Sonic Mania video review, is, how well does pixel art work in the context of a video review? Maybe I'll go back to having, traditional scanned artwork. Maybe I won't. We'll see. But it's just something to try right now. And, I did this thinking that, maybe instead of spending all this time coloring these pencil sketches like I'd been doing, like I did on my How to Fix Sonic video, I'm thinking, maybe pixel art will be faster and maybe it'll look higher quality. And I don't think that's true. Like, I think it looks really good. I think the artwork I did, I'm proud of it insofar as an artist can be proud of their artwork. There is a secret part of my brain that is already nitpicking everything to death, but as someone who draws, you have to force yourself to ignore that voice. And ignoring that voice the best that I can, I think this artwork works. It just feels like it takes a lot of effort. So I don't know. Maybe if I drop the resolution even lower, because currently I'm working in 640 by 480, which isn't actually that much smaller as far as pixel art goes. I suspect that people out there watching this when the video review comes out later this month, they're not even really going to be able to tell that it's pixel art, so that's definitely something the gears are turning in my head for next month, or not next month, next review, if I continue to do this pixel art style. So, you know, experimenting, trying new things, all that fun stuff. But yeah, just head down on this Mania review. I think I'd have to check my notes. I'm not in the closet like I was last month. Which, by the way, like, if last month, if the audio sounded a little weird to you, I was trying out new things. I was back in the closet again. Setsune had some background noise issues he wasn't happy with. I thought the podcast personally sounded fine to me. I did do some noise reduction on his audio, but the truth of the matter is I don't mess around with Audacity that much. I basically just hit record, hit stop, export, and then I do like the bulk of my editing in either Goldwave or Sony Vegas, because Sony Vegas can do just plain audio editing. Like I use Goldwave to clip out the breaths. If you've noticed in my video reviews, you don't hear me breathe a lot between sentences. That is by design. I go through and I mute every single breath I take, because if I don't do that, I think some of you know, I get complaints about that, because I guess I breathe loudly. I don't feel like I breathe that loudly in these podcasts, but I also, when I write review scripts and I have to read them, again, going back to Hemingway app, I tend to write very long sentences. So, as you can imagine, as I'm reading my script off, it's just like, you know, I can't breathe. Because, like, I've listened to this podcast, and I don't think I breathe super loudly here. It's just a matter of being aware of that in my script. But, you know, like I said, some audio problems last month. I don't think they were that bad, but, you know, Setsune wasn't happy with his audio, and if he's not happy, then of course, you know, there is a problem, because, you know, what kind of host would I be if I didn't listen to and act upon the things that he wants me to do? Things like that. This month, I am not in the closet. I am sort of physically holding my microphone about, we'll say, 6 inches from my face. I think I did a test recording and it sounded pretty good. But I do worry that you can hear, because I'm holding it by the stand. It is screwed into the stand here, and I'm worried, like you probably heard that. That was the sound of my fingers peeling off the plastic. Because I've been holding this stand for like the last 5 or 10 minutes now. So if you hear like little clicks and clacks and things like that, you know, maybe the cable will bump something, maybe I'll have to change hands like I just did. And that's just an unfortunate circumstance of the way we're recording. What I should get, something former Patreon supporter, my cousin Matt, once told me to get, was one of those like arms, those spring arms or whatever, like professional recorders use. You know, it's an adjustable arm that like a microphone sits in. Like, maybe they're called, no, I was gonna say maybe they're called like a shock mount, but shock mounts are the weird like metal cage that a microphone sits in. What I'm thinking of is just, I don't know, there's a word for it, they're like $20. Like, I should really think about just buying one, breaking down and buying one. But I don't record that much, like one podcast a month, maybe a video review once a month at this rate, maybe a stream a couple times a month, and like the streams sound fine. So it's like one of those things where it's like, do I really need one of these clip-on retractable microphone arm adjuster thingies? And I don't know. That's something, like, I'm currently eyeballing my desk, thinking where I would even clip something like that on. and I don't even know if I could. But it would be nice to have. Maybe I'll splurge and buy it for myself for my birthday next month. Who knows? Who knows? It would be. I'd probably use it a lot more than I think I'm letting on. I can't remember if that was a tangent or not. Like, I get so deep into these tangents sometimes. Obviously, I talked about being full steam ahead on the Sonic Mania video review. The only really, other thing I've done over the last 3 weeks is I got the PlayStation 4 version of Sonic Forces, thanks to Jeffrey Caban. He said, think of it as like a patron donation. I don't think he's actually a patron of the Patreon, but I think he obviously listens to the podcast. He knows, he seems familiar with my work, and he's months and months ago, before I even had a PlayStation 4, now I'm questioning whether I had the PlayStation 4 at the time or not. I don't remember. Point is, months ago, he offered me the PlayStation 4 version of Sonic Forces because he had an extra for some reason. I don't actually remember quite right now why he has an extra, but point is, he said he had an extra. I said, no, I'll deal with the PC version, because at the time I figured the PC version would be fine. And obviously the PC version has all these frame pacing problems that makes it kind of a nightmare to record. So, I was complaining about these frame pacing problems, and he said, I still have that PlayStation 4 version. I said, okay, I'll take it. I even offered to pay him shipping, and he wouldn't take it, which is come on, guys. Let me pay you at least for shipping, right? But I've played through probably 75% of that version of the game, and that's still Sonic Forces. Again, if you want to hear extended thoughts about Sonic Forces, that would be last month's podcast. But the performance, at the very least, is more stable than the PC version, so that's a plus. When I get around to that video review for Sonic Forces, it will at least look as good as Sonic Forces does. For whatever that's worth. Haven't played any other games this month. I played 10 minutes of Trials Fusion last night. I played... Oh my gosh, I think that might be it. No, I've played more than that. I played 20 minutes of Grand Theft Auto 3 the other day. And I guess I've kind of been replaying Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing on the PC, because Team Sonic Racing just got announced. And actually, that might be it. Those 3 games is all I've played in the last 3 weeks. And, I haven't, beyond that, those were all, the last few days. I haven't played anything beyond that. Oh, I did play The Crew 2, which I streamed a little bit of. And by a little bit, I mean almost 3 hours. But, there's a stream archive up on the YouTube channel. If y'all want to see that, all I did was drive around, do a little road trip. Road trip streams are something I've thought about doing for many years now. I wanted to do, way back in the day, way back when I first started my YouTube channel, I wanted to do, a Grand Theft Auto San Andreas road trip, where I just drive around the world map and look for interesting things and point them out. And I never ended up doing that video because I had friends at the time who discouraged me. They said, no, that'll probably be, kind of a boring video, so maybe you shouldn't do it. And I never ended up doing it. The Crew 2 stream was just basically me driving from Miami all the way up to Seattle. So the bottom right corner of the map to the top left. And sort of seeing the sights along the way. We visited Roswell, New Mexico, we visited Las Vegas, and literally I think those are the only 2 points of interest. There were other cities that I probably could have visited and probably should have visited, but instead I just drove through back roads and such for 3 hours. And it was fun, I like doing that kind of stuff. If I'm being honest, that's probably my favorite part of open world games, is just the chill road trip driving experience, and that's kind of why I wanted to do that stream. So, stream archive of that is up on the channel. I've played no other video games besides what I just mentioned. Like, I haven't even really played tons of Final Fantasy VI, to be honest. I've hit a point in the game where it kind of opens up a little bit. Me and Setsune talked about that last month. I did get through, like, the next major story event, which is the opera that everyone, you know, like the much celebrated Final Fantasy VI opera scene. And it was definitely very memorable. It was one thing that really surprised me. And I guess I should, you know, again, as usual, outline that I talk about spoilers here for Final Fantasy VI. So, you know, if you're playing through Final Fantasy III on your Super Nintendo Classic, if you're playing through it on the Game Boy Advance or on the Steam version or whatever, and you don't want to hear spoilers, skip ahead, we'll say 5 minutes, and I should be done talking about it. But to get into the spoiler content, what really surprised me about the opera sequence is that if you flubbed, like, even a single line, it failed you and kicked you back out into the overworld map. Like, it was genuinely surprising that it made me memorize all those lines. And, like, but that's like the other side of the coin, right? Is like you think, oh, you know, there's all these lines that you have to memorize. You only really have to memorize 3. There's like 9 or 12 lines total in the entire opera sequence that you have to know, but it only prompts you on 3 of those lines. So, you know, it wasn't that difficult. I failed it once, you know, shut the game off, restarted it, and then passed it the second time. But like a lot of things with Final Fantasy VI, it wasn't really like this amazing thing that blew my mind. Like, it was cool, it was fun, you know, it was nice, but there are things about Final Fantasy VI that I'm not really gelling with. And part of that is that the plot feels like it's in a rush, like super in a rush. Like, let's talk about the opera scene, for example. So, Celeste, a member in your party, looks like a famous opera singer named Maria. And this sky pirate, captain, gambler guy, Setzer, wants to kidnap Maria and force her to marry him. So the idea is your team of character needs Setzer's airship to travel to the Empire to fight them. And since Celeste looks like Maria, the idea is that Celeste will do the opera, Setzer will abduct Celeste, and then you'll steal his airship, or at the very least, like, coerce him into letting you use it. And there's this weird scene where Locke, the famous thief in your party, is talking to the impresario, the guy who's organizing the opera, and he's like, oh, you know, we'll pull old switcheroo, we'll let Setzer, you know, kidnap Celeste instead, and you don't have to worry about Maria. And Celeste, like, sort of freaks out. She's like, wait a minute, I can't sing, I don't want to perform an opera, I'm a military commander, you can't make me do this. And then, on the turn of a dime, you snap your fingers, and suddenly Celeste rushes into the dressing room, and now she's practicing singing. Like, she does a full 180-degree spin on her point of view of this without, like, voicing why she wants to suddenly be this opera singer or anything else. It's just this really weird moment where she's like, she seems super resistant to the idea, and then just flip, now she's all for it. Now she's gonna practice her lines, she's gonna get all dressed up, and that's just the way it is. She doesn't need to be convinced or anything. And, like, that's just one of those weird things in Final Fantasy VI that I'm not really gelling with. And something else I'm not really gelling with is the fact that they play Setzer up as, like, this fun-loving, roguish, Han Solo type gambler guy, when the implication really seems to be that he's kidnapping women and sort of, like, it almost seems like maybe he intends to rape them, and the game is just like, oh, what a wacky fun character this guy is, and it's just like, he seemed awfully violent when he threw Celeste into this holding area, this sort of like living room zone inside of his airship. That's weird. But, that's as far as I've gotten in Final Fantasy VI. I think we're currently in Setzer's airship. He's agreed to let us use it to attack the Empire. And that's as far as I've gotten there. Continuing rushing down our list here of the very limited things I've done this month. I also finally saw The Last Jedi, Star Wars Episode 9, I think it is. Yeah, that sounds right. Episode 9. And, short answer is I really like that movie. It really went in some new, interesting, weird directions that I greatly enjoy. Like, the whole theme of the movie, to me, again, spoilers, if you just skipped ahead 5 minutes from your Final Fantasy VI section and you don't want to hear about The Last Jedi, skip ahead maybe 10 minutes this time. Gosh, I lost my train of thought, what I was trying to say. The theme of the movie is, at least to me, that, like, you can't count on heroes. That kind of like that heroes don't exist, right? Like the first movie, The Force Awakens, people have noted that there are a lot of parallels in that movie to Star Wars A New Hope. It's very, like, nostalgia-focused. It's very typical Star Wars, let's say. You have Rey, who's kind of like Luke Skywalker. She lives on this desert planet. She's a nobody, but, maybe she has Force powers. Maybe she's secretly a Jedi. Maybe she's, like, really special. And it sets up, like, oh, who's Rey's parents? Who are they going to be? And then you get to The Last Jedi, and it is very plainly stated, hey, Rey's parents weren't special. She's not special. She's just some dirt farmer from a nowhere planet. But she's the best we have. She's our hero. Finn is our hero. People will complain about Finn, and maybe I'll give them that, Finn's story is a little rocky. He was supposed to be a little bit more on the fence with, whether or not he wants to help the rebellion versus helping the Empire. Those scenes actually apparently did end up getting cut. But Finn, again, not a hero, but he's the best we've got. That movie opens with him trying to run away. He doesn't want to be part of this conflict. And, it's just all these things where it's just like, nobody is destined to be a hero. Heroes are made. Heroes are anyone who steps up to the challenge and wins. And that's the theme, I think, of The Last Jedi, is that don't rely on, like, your legends are terrible. Your heroes are terrible. It's just average, everyday people that will end up saving the world. And, if you want something done, you kind of have to do it yourself in a certain sense. That's probably not quite the right wording I would use, but that's the best wording that is coming to mind. And, like, people will say, oh, I didn't like the humor in that movie. And, fair enough. The humor in The Last Jedi, like, totally worked for me. I loved it. I thought it was great to see this sort of, like, almost dark humor in a Star Wars movie. Luke, like, winking at people, winking at his enemies, like, hey, what's up? I'm here to kick your butt, things like that. That's really good. I really like that. I like the more playful side of Star Wars. And I like that they actually, like, this movie makes a point to bring back, like, let's say, the playful Yoda character that we saw in Return of the Jedi and Empire Strikes Back, that sort of, like, goofy little old guy, instead of, the modern interpretation of Yoda, which is this super serious Jedi master guy that is, like, all-knowing wisdom. But, like, like I was saying, I kind of get it. People who don't like the humor, I might like the humor in The Last Jedi, but I went through something similar like that with Half-Life 2 Episode 1. There's a scene in Half-Life 2 Episode 1 where you're sort of, like, evacuating out of these apartment buildings, and you actually run across, like, this pair of rebel survivors that are, sort of just, like, cowering on a couch. They're comforting each other. you see like a similar pair of people in the original Half-Life 2 like standard edition, and now you see them again in episode 1, and they're just sort of comforting each other. They're kind of sobbing, like, oh, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And if you stand there and you listen to them long enough, they actually start talking about how, like, things were better before the rebellion. Like, they start cracking jokes about how, like, remember the time that Dr. Breen had the jugglers on his show? And, like, that rubbed me such the wrong way that I actually wrote an email to Valve being like, yo, what is this? This is weird. This is out of character. I don't like this. And I actually got a response from their lore director, or whatever you want to call him, Mike Laidlaw. And, he explained that, Half-Life has a history and dark humor and blah, blah. We're sorry that you don't agree with, what we put in the game, but we think it's fine, so on and so forth. So, I get where people are coming from, but again, the humor in The Last Jedi didn't bother me. Like, the blue milk from the aliens, that was great. The space nuns on the planet that Luke and Rey were at, those were great. What else? I like the little touches of humor in that movie. They weren't like big, they weren't like, it wasn't like a funny movie, but it was just, nice to have a little bit of levity in those movies. And, the older Star Wars movies, the old Lucasfilm movies had a lot of that. Like, you think of like Indiana Jones, and that movie is all about like, the wink humor and stuff like that. You think about like Han Solo is like that character in a nutshell. Like, I mean, obviously, Harrison Ford is Han Solo. Harrison Ford is Indiana Jones. So it makes sense that both characters would sort of be like these, wink, wink, we're sort of like the comedy in this movie. Not to say that, Han Solo is in The Last Jedi, but you know what I mean, right? There's always been moments of humor, even as far back as A New Hope. We have C-3PO and R2-D2's wacky antics in the desert, where they're sort of like this Laurel and Hardy pair of just goobers goofing around in Tatooine and just, yucking it up and things like that. It's not a stretch to have humor like that in Star Wars. So I think that was fine. And like, I said earlier, the way that it like sort of cancels out The Force Awakens works for me too, because again, theme of the movie is that, destiny is crap. There's no such thing as destiny. We make our own fates. We make our own heroes. If you want, be the change that you want to be in the world, or be the change you want to see in the world, is actually the saying. So yeah, that was a good movie. I'm very interested in seeing if episode 10 will carry through and sort of give this new trilogy, I think, the closure it deserves. Because there's a lot of weird stuff that they're setting up. The dynamics are scattered to the winds, so, it'll be very interesting to see where things go next. And actually, I think we're getting pretty down there in my notes. Like, I only watched one other movie last month, and it was a made-for-TV movie starring Jeff Goldblum, a made-for-TV adaptation of Sleepy Hollow. And there's nothing really to say about that, except that it was kind of boring, and it was kind of bad. Like, I've never read the original Sleepy Hollow short story, so I'm not entirely sure, how accurate and faithful it was to the original short story. This made-for-TV movie was like 1979, so, very early in Jeff Goldblum's career. It had like, it was taped off of TV with commercials left in and everything, and there was this like outro at the end with Gary Coleman, where he was talking about how he knew how the story ended because he'd read the original short story way back in the day. And, I'm not sure if those two gel. Like, I would have been more on board with the movie if it wasn't for the way that it ended. And the way that it ended, is it sort of just kind of threw the Headless Horseman under the bus. Like, Sleepy Hollow is the story of the Headless Horseman. And this movie ended up setting up like 3 or 4 different like ghostly characters. It sort of made you question, who is the Headless Horseman? Like, as in, who is pretending to be the Headless Horseman? Because again, the whole movie is sort of about like contrasting, like, obviously the ultimate version of Sleepy Hollow is the old Disney short, right? That is like the definitive edition of that story that I think most people will remember. Maybe some people remember the Johnny Depp movie with Christina Ricci. That one was okay. It wasn't great, but it was fine. But like the whole idea is that Ichabod Crane is supposed to be like this superstitious person. And in this made-for-TV movie, it is the opposite. Instead, it's the entire town of Sleepy Hollow that is like, superstitious and telling him like, oh, there's ghosts everywhere. And Ichabod's like, ghosts aren't real. Get out of here. So it sets up like 3 or 4 different ghosts that sort of hassle Ichabod Crane. And he just kind of brushes them off. He's like, no, those aren't real. Like, you think this owl is the spirit of a dead Indian chief, or I guess Native American chief. The movie calls it an Indian because, again, this was 1979. But a dead Native American chief, you think, he's reincarnated as this owl, and oh, pshaw, that's not real. And the former schoolmaster of Sleepy Hollow, he was supposedly killed by Brom Bones. Pshaw, that's not a ghost. He's that kind of person. And, slowly over the course of the movie, he does loosen up a little bit. He starts questioning whether or not the ghosts are real, whether or not, he's going crazy, because I guess, previous schoolmasters in Sleepy Hollow also have a habit of going crazy. And the Headless Horseman himself doesn't really show up very much. I think he shows up once, like at the very beginning, he shows up once more, like in the middle of the movie. And then he shows up at the end, and you're never really quite sure, if that's someone in a costume or not. And the movie, it does eventually set up that, Brom Bones is obviously pretending to be the Headless Horseman, but then it also sets up at, like, the very last possible second that, hey, the ghost of the Headless Horseman is real. And then the moment it, like, confirms this, that it's like, hey, the Headless Horseman is a real ghost, and he could actually, like, hurt someone and cause real damage, he's just kind of brushed off as like, oh, well, I guess ghosts are real, and then the movie ends. And that's terrible. That's a poor movie. I do not recommend Sleepy Hollow with Jeff Goldblum, especially because there's only like 1 or 2 good scenes in the entire movie, and it's like an hour and 42 minutes long. So, not recommended for your viewing pleasure. And with that ending on Sleepy Hollow, that is probably the end of this podcast. I also need to go get a drink. I didn't actually get a drink before I started this podcast, and maybe you'll hear that my voice is starting to sound pretty rough. But, not to say that like I'm cutting this off early. I really don't have any more notes here. So, I think this will be just where the podcast ends. Like I said, this was going to be a quick episode this month. We're only at 37 minutes. Holy crap, that was fast. Maybe next month I'll have more to say. Maybe I won't. I am sort of like starting to run down on my YouTube subscriptions again. Like, I have this like real problem where I like build up tons and tons and tons of YouTube subscriptions, like unwatched videos, and then I have like this backlog I have to work through, and I'm sort of working down to the point where I don't really have a backlog anymore, and that's why I ended up watching The Last Jedi, that's why I ended up watching Sleepy Hollow. Next on my list here is like The Witch, like the Vivitch, VVITCH. I'll probably end up watching that. For Christmas, I ended up getting a Blu-ray of Logan, which I should probably get around to watching. Maybe I'll watch that and like Deadpool. I've already seen Deadpool once. It's a very good movie. I love Deadpool. It was one of those movies that ended up turning out like way better than I expected. But, you know, I got both of those for Christmas. I got Deadpool and Logan. Maybe I'll make like a movie night of it. Maybe I'll make a movie night of it tonight. Who knows? But I should get back to that. I should get back to trying to finish up the artwork for my Sonic Mania video review, because E3 starts tomorrow, and I have write-ups to do and everything like that. So the sooner I actually, like, I at the very least get these pencil sketches done, the better. So I will see you guys next month for the July edition of the Patreon Party People podcast, which will probably be, as is customary, a free podcast for everyone. I try and make the July podcasts, you know, universally free, because July is my birthday month. So, you know, kind of as like a reverse birthday present, I sort of flip it around and make the podcast just free in general. But that's next month. We'll get there when we get there. For now, I need to end this podcast. And, you know, it's the end of the podcast. Bye!